In this chapter, we consider some of the ethical issues emerging in business today, including how they arise from the demands of specific stakeholder groups. We will begin with an explanation of certain universal concepts that pervade business ethics, such as integrity, honesty, and fairness. Then, we will move on to explore a number of emerging ethical issues, including misuse of company time and resources, abusive and intimidating behavior, lying, conflicts of interest, bribery, corporate intelligence, discrimination, sexual harassment, fraud, financial misconduct, insider trading, intellectual property rights, and privacy. We will also examine the challenge of determining decisions that have an ethical component for the firm to consider. Recognizing an ethical issue. An ethical issue is a problem, situation, or opportunity that requires an individual or group to choose among actions. Recognizing an ethical issue is also known as ethical awareness. The first step in understanding business ethics is to develop ethical issue awareness. Awareness arises because of conflicts among individuals' personal moral philosophies and values, the values and culture of the organizations in which they work, and those of the society in which they live. New ethical issues are emerging constantly, and they can be difficult to recognize. Failure to acknowledge ethical issues puts corporations at great risk, particularly in industries where business is perceived as a game that must be won at all costs. Once again, an ethical issue is a situation or a problem that requires thought, discussion, or investigation in order to make a decision. Let's take a look at specific types of observed misconduct. As we discussed last week, misconduct came in many forms. We will go into each of these in more detail in a moment, but this slide offers a snapshot of specific types of observed misconduct, beginning with misuse of company time, abusive behavior, lying to employees, company resource abuse, violating company internet use policies, discrimination, conflicts of interest, health or safety violations, lying to outside stakeholders, stealing, falsifying time reports or hours worked, employee benefit violations, and sexual harassment. And once again, we will go into more depth in each of these in just a moment. But before we go into each of the types of observed misconduct, let's dig a little into foundational values for identifying business ethics issues. Integrity. Integrity refers to being whole, sound, and in an unimpaired condition. In an organization, it means uncompromising adherence to ethical values. Now, once again, I'd like to reiterate, understanding foundational values can help identify and develop discussions and a constructive dialogue on appropriate conduct. And integrity is uncompromising adherence to ethical values. And then next we have honesty. Honesty refers to truthfulness or trustworthiness. Simply, telling the truth to the best of your knowledge. Issues related to honesty also arise because business is sometimes regarded as a game, governed by its own rules rather than those of society. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have dishonesty. Dishonesty is a lack of integrity, incomplete disclosure, and an unwillingness to tell the truth. Lying, cheating, and stealing, these are all actions usually associated with dishonest conduct. Fairness. Fairness is the quality of being just, equitable, and impartial. In business, equality is about the distribution of benefits and resources. The distribution could be applied to stakeholders or to the greater society. Reciprocity is an interchange of giving and receiving in a social relationship. It is the return of small favors of approximately equal value. Optimization is the trade-off between equity and efficiency, meaning equity being equality or fairness, and efficiency being maximum productivity. Honesty, fairness, and integrity are the glue that holds businesses together. Ethical issues and dilemmas in business. I want to take a moment to explain there's a little bit of a difference between each. An ethical issue is a problem, a situation, or opportunity that requires an individual, group, or organization to choose among several actions that must be evaluated as right or wrong, or ethical or unethical. An ethical dilemma is a problem, situation, or opportunity that requires an individual, group, or organization to choose among several actions that have negative outcomes. So, just to repeat, an ethical issue is a problem, situation, or opportunity that requires the individual or the group or the organization to choose among several actions that must be evaluated as right or wrong. An ethical dilemma is a problem, situation, or opportunity that requires either the individual or the organization or group to choose among several actions that might have negative outcomes. And as you read through the content this week and as we discuss some of these issues, you'll be more comfortable with the differences between both of those. Major shareholder issues. Shareholders play a very important role in financing the organization. That being said, they are an important stakeholder in the organization. Major shareholder issues include core values. Shareholders want to know that the organization and or its leaders know their core values. Shareholders participate in electing directors. If anyone out there owns stock, you're familiar with having voting rights. For myself, I will often receive a little flyer in the mail asking me if I care to vote for the directors for the stock that I own. So shareholders participate in electing those directors. Executive compensation. Shareholders want to know that the executive staff are being paid fairly, but they also want to make sure that they're not being overpaid. Overpayment to anyone, including the executive staff, results in a loss of profits or loss of opportunity to grow their investment in some way. Next, we have legal compliance. Shareholders want to know that the organization is following the law. If the organization is not following the law, then the organization opens itself up to an expensive lawsuit and potentially a shift of focus within the organization. When an organization has to fight off a lawsuit, it often takes the focus off of the operations. It takes the executive staff and a lot of the team members, takes their focus off of their day-to-day operations and the overall operations of the organization. It takes their focus off of that and shifts it onto the lawsuit. So not only can lawsuits be a financial hardship, but they can also be an operational hardship as well. So shareholders want to make sure that the organization is following the law. Then we have the lobbying and political activities. The next one I want to mention is reputation management. Reputation management, very important. The shareholders care about a firm's reputation, as we learned and talked a little bit last week. A good reputation is tied to long-term success, and a bad reputation can bankrupt an organization. And shareholders, those are the folks that invest capital into the organization. So it is very important to them to make sure that the reputation stays intact and that it is taken care of and positive, because a bankrupt company doesn't help them with their financial investment. Next, we have integrity in collecting and managing data. We're going to go into a lot of detail on this in just a moment, but it's really important for shareholders. Shareholders want to feel confident the organization collects its information, for example, information on its competition. They want to make sure that the organization is collecting this information fairly and honestly. And once again, we're going to go over this in a little more detail in just a moment. But I wanted to kind of put these ideas in your mind as we talk through the next few slides. And the last thing we have here is the supply chain relationships and human rights. If the supply chain is broken, then the product cannot be manufactured and sales will drop. It's that simple. So shareholders are very concerned with the organization's supply chain relationship as well as with human rights, because they kind of go hand in hand. For example, shareholders want to make sure that the organization is not using child labor in a third world country to sew their clothes. So very important that the supply chain relationships and human rights are handled ethically. Now let's take a look at some of the misconduct in more depth, starting with the misuse of company time. Doing personal work during work hours, playing with social media on company time. Now, don't confuse this with having to take a personal call from your kids. Of course, there are things that you must do when you're at work. But when we talk about misuse of company time, we mean spending hours each day doing something personal. And misuse of company time and resources is a major form of observed misconduct in organizations. Using company computer software and internet services for personal business is one of the most common ways employees misuse company resources. And many companies, like Boeing, have implemented official policies delineating acceptable use of company resources. So this is a big one of the most often observed activities. Next, we have abusive or intimidating behavior. It's not okay at all. It's a common ethical problem for employees. The concepts of abusive or intimidating behavior can mean anything from physical threats, false accusations, annoying behavior, and yes, I said that right, annoying behavior, profanity, of course, insults, yelling, harshness, ignoring someone, or even unreasonableness. The meaning of these words can differ from person to person, so you can see how this can become an ethical issue and how challenging it might be to work through a situation where one might perceive a type of behavior as abusive or intimidating behavior, and another person might think that's perfectly normal and natural. Now, intent is an important factor in determining whether a situation is abusive. And bullying, I want to mention bullying. Bullying is associated with a hostile workplace where a person or group is threatened, harassed, or overly criticized. The concept of bullying is now considered a legal issue, with millions of Americans reporting having experienced or witnessed bullying at work. So it's becoming a bigger and bigger emerging ethical issue. It's not illegal here yet in the United States, although it is illegal in other countries. You'll read more about that in your text. But I'd like to take a moment here to share some detail with you, actions associated with bullies. I don't know about you, but I've had my own personal experience with bullies. Some of us, it happened to us as children. It certainly happened to me as a child, and probably most of us can relate to some of these terms here. Actions associated with bullies: spreading rumors to damage others. I'd like to call that gossip. Gossiping about others, spreading rumors. That could be considered an action of a bully. Blocking others' communication in the workplace. Flaunting status or authority to take advantage of others. Discrediting others' ideas and opinions. Use of emails to demean others. Failing to communicate or return communication. I found this one to be very interesting. Failing to communicate or return communication. How many times have you sent out an email and did not get a response? Well, come to find out, based upon this study, enough of that failure to return communication might be perceived as a bully action. Who knows? Insults, yelling, shouting, of course, I would consider that to be bully behavior. But this is also very interesting. One thing you have to take into consideration is that, I'm talking from the United States. I'm talking from American perspective. Different cultures, these certain behaviors would be completely acceptable. Insults, yelling, and shouting. There are certain countries where, for example, in France, you hear yelling and screaming coming out from the kitchen. It's perfectly acceptable there. So it really depends on the culture. Next, we have using terminology to discriminate by gender, race, or age. That's a no-no. Using eye or body language to hurt others or their reputations. I want you to think about that for a minute. Have you ever seen anyone roll their eyes? You're looking at someone and someone's standing behind them and the person says something and then someone standing behind them rolls their eyes. Not okay. Number 10. Taking credit for others' work or ideas. There is nothing that irritates me more. Okay, let's dig into these a little more deeply. So lying. Lying relates to distorting the truth, and there are 3 types of lies. You have joking without malice. Now, an example of joking without malice would be a white lie. A white lie that's told not to hurt someone's feelings. I think we've all done that. I personally have told white lies, didn't want to hurt someone's feelings. I think we've all done that. So that would be considered joking without malice. And then we have commission lying. And commission lying is creating a perception or belief by words that intentionally deceive the receiver of the message. Commission lying involves using words or creating that noise. Noise can be the intentional use of modes of communication that the sender knows the receiver does not fully understand. So let's see if I can make a good example here. Listen to how I say this. He's a really hard worker. Wow. Amazing. He's a really hard worker. You see the difference between the two? I know that's kind of a silly example, but I was trying to share with you that I've used the same words, he's a really hard worker, but the way that I have used my tone, the way I've added on some words, a little it just creates a completely different definition of the exact same words. So that is an example of commission lying. And then, of course, we have lying by omission. Omission lying is intentionally not informing others of any differences, problems, safety warnings, or negative issues related to the product or company that significantly affects awareness, intention, or behavior. Marketing. This is a big one. Marketing companies not sharing all the information or just leaving certain things out so that the consumer doesn't have the whole picture. The last point I'd like to make on lying is that the point at which a lie becomes unethical in business is based on the context of the statement and its intent to distort the truth. A lie becomes illegal if it is determined by the judgment of courts to damage others. So a lie is unethical if the intent was to distort the truth. It's not quite illegal at that point. However, it becomes flat out illegal if it's determined by the courts to damage others. So that's the difference there. Moving on to conflicts of interest. A conflict of interest exists when an individual must choose whether to advance his or her own interests, those of the organization, or those of some other group. And to avoid conflicts of interest, employees must be able to separate their private interest from business dealings. Bribery. Bribery is the practice of offering something, typically money, usually money, in order to gain an illicit advantage. Bribery can be defined as an unlawful act, but it can also be a business ethics issues in that a culture includes such fees as standard practice. It is illegal to bribe here in the United States, but it's not illegal to do so in other countries. Now there's different types of bribery. We have active bribery, and active bribery means that the person who promises or gives the bribe commits the offense. You see on TV all the time, TV shows where someone tries to give a police officer a little bit of money to get out of a ticket. The police officer says, "Are you trying to bribe me?" Well, the person that's trying to do the bribing will be in the wrong in that situation. Next, you have passive bribery, and this is an offense committed by the receiver of the bribe. So in my example of the police officer and the person trying to get out of that ticket, so if the person trying to get out of that ticket offers that police officer $100 to get out of the ticket, and that police officer takes the money, then it's the police officer's my bad, okay? And then the facilitation of payments, and this is to obtain or retain business. Facilitation payments, these are to obtain or retain business, but do not constitute bribery payments in the United States as long as they are small. However, the legality of this practice varies in other countries. So it depends. Here in the United States, it depends on the monetary value of it. But for the most part, it is considered illegal. However, small money exchange probably won't be much of an issue here. It does vary in other countries. Bribery is completely illegal in the United Kingdom. And then, of course, in other countries, it is open for interpretation as it can possibly be. So just be aware of where you're doing business and what those laws are. Now, I want to spend some time on corporate intelligence. Corporate intelligence is the collection and analysis of information on markets, technologies, customers, and competitors, as well as on socioeconomic and external political trends. Now, corporate intelligence, and I will probably refer to it as CI moving forward. CI involves in-depth discovery of information from corporate and court documents, regulatory filings, and press releases. CI is not an ethical issue if the information is obtained legally. However, there are a number of questionable or illegal techniques used to collect information, and we will talk about them now. Corporate intelligence. Now, first of all, there are 3 intelligence models: passive monitoring system for early warning, tactical field support, and support dedicated to top management strategy. You will learn more about these reading the textbook. I would like to spend a little time talking about hacking. Hacking is one of the top methods for obtaining trade secrets. We have system hacking. System hacking assumes that the attacker already has access to a user account. System hacking. Anybody out there have their significant other's password to their phone? Just a thought. Wink, wink. Next, we have remote hacking. Remote hacking involves remotely trying to penetrate a computer system via the internet. This happens all. In fact, we've seen this with Facebook recently. I keep getting these friend requests. Well, I'm already friends with them. Well, somebody has remotely hacked the system, and they're sending out all these, friend requests. And then we have physical hacking. Physical hacking requires that an agent personally enter into a facility, and this would be someone literally, sneaking into the facility, sneaking into the computer rooms, and hacking in that way. So you have system hacking where you have a password, remote hacking where you're digging in from Nigeria or whatever, and then you have physical hacking where you actually have someone that's gone into the facility and is physically hacking. Next, we have social engineering. Social engineering is another popular method of obtaining valuable corporate information. Social engineering is tricking or fooling individuals into revealing their passwords or other valuable corporate information. I get this a lot. I will get an email, and I'm sure some of you have received these as well. You get these emails saying, oh, you need to change your password to your bank account, something crazy, which we all know that is a phishing and scam, but it works for some people. There was a big one recently, the IRS. And the IRS was calling mostly older people saying that if you don't pay this bill, we're going to send the police out and arrest you. And people were sending them money and giving them their account information. It was a terrible, terrible scam. So, social engineering. Next, shoulder surfing. Has anyone been guilty of this one? Shoulder surfing is when someone looks over an employee's shoulder to obtain a password. Honestly, I can honestly say I never have and I never will. And if I am typing in a password and if anyone's standing around me, I tell them to look the other way. I have no problem doing that. Next one, password guessing. Well, that's pretty self-explanatory. Next one, dumpster diving. Not kidding. Dumpster diving, it's a messy mess, but very successful way to acquire trade secrets. Once trash is discarded into a public street or alley, it is considered fair game. This is dumpster diving. Next, whacking. This is wireless hacking. And then the last one here, we have phone eavesdropping. This is basically another tool for corporate intelligence agents. A person with a digital recording device can monitor and record a fax line, a phone line. So phone eavesdropping. Hacking, social engineering, shoulder surfing, password guessing, dumpster diving, whacking, phone eavesdropping. These are all considered unethical ways to obtain intelligence. Moving on to discrimination. Oof, this is a bad one. Discrimination. discrimination of any kind on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, marital status, sexual orientation, public assistance status, disability, age, national origin, or veteran status is illegal in the United States. And a company in the United States can be sued for discrimination if it, number one, refuses to hire an individual for discriminatory reasons. Next one, maintains a system of employment that unreasonably excludes an individual from employment, unreasonably discharges an individual. And the last one, discriminates against an individual with respect to hiring, employment terms, promotion, or privileges of employment as it relates to discrimination. Continuing with discrimination, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, handles discrimination filings. The Age Discrimination in Employment Act specifically outlaws hiring practices that discriminate against people 40 years of age or older, as well as those that require employees to retire before the age of 70. So they can't discriminate against you. They can't, as far as age discrimination is concerned, over the age of 40 for hiring, and they cannot force you to retire before the age of 70. And many companies have initiated affirmative action programs, which involves efforts to recruit, hire, train, and promote qualified individuals from groups that have traditionally been discriminated against on the basis of race, gender, or other characteristics. These programs may be mandated from the federal level, but many companies opt to implement them voluntarily. Discrimination can also be an ethical issue in business when companies use race or other personal factors to discriminate against specific groups or customers. Sexual harassment is a form of sex discrimination that violates Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It is defined as a repeated, unwanted behavior of sexual nature perpetrated upon one individual by another. To establish sexual harassment, an employee must understand the definition of a hostile work environment, for which 3 criteria must be met. A, the conduct was unwelcome. B, the conduct was severe, pervasive, and regarded by the claimant as so hostile or offensive as to alter his or her conditions of employment. Third, the conduct was such that a reasonable person would find it hostile or offensive. And I'd like to just take a moment to talk a little bit about the hostile work environment and sexual harassment. Now, years and years and years ago, sexual harassment was from a male boss to a female employee. But that's not the case anymore. It can be from a female boss to a male employee. It can be from a female colleague to a female colleague, a male colleague to a male colleague. It works in all different directions these days. So just be aware of that, be cognizant of that. And once again, the conduct has to be so severe that a reasonable person would find it hostile or offensive. You know, if someone came back to my desk and said, "Oh, shoot," and I felt that the word shoot was hostile and offensive, and I went to the boss and said, "I've been harassed." Well, what happened? They came back to my office and said, "Shoot." Well, I think most people would agree that's not hostile or offensive. Might be annoying, but it's not hostile or offensive. Okay, continuing on with the sexual harassment, the key ethical issue within sexual harassment is called dual relationship, which is defined as a personal, loving, and or sexual relationship with someone with whom you share professional responsibilities. An unethical dual relationship is one where the relationship causes a conflict of interest or risk of impairment to the professional judgment. So consent is created if any sexual relationship is considered mutual. And to avoid sexual misconduct, it is important that a firm follow these 7 steps. First and foremost, a statement of the policy. You need to state the policy, make sure everyone knows what the sexual harassment policy is. You need to provide a definition of sexual harassment. Provide a non-retaliation policy, meaning that if someone reports sexual harassment, there will not be any retaliation on that party. You need to create a safe environment so that if someone does feel that they have been sexually harassed or harassed in any way, shape, or form, that they will feel safe in order to do so, because if you don't create that level of safety, then no one will say anything and people will probably just start quitting, or may even slap the organization with a lawsuit. We need to have specific procedures for prevention of harassment and sexual harassment, of course. Establish, enforce, and encourage victims to report. This kind of goes back to that non-retaliation policy, but you want to create an environment that encourages victims to report any type of harassment. Establish a reporting procedure for most companies. If you are an employee and if you have experienced some sort of sexual misconduct, sexual harassment, or harassment of any type, typically you would report that to your supervisor, and then that supervisor would report it to their supervisor. There's kind of a chain of command. But let's say, for example, your supervisor is the one performing the misconduct. You can't very well go to that supervisor and report them. So the company needs to establish a very clear reporting procedure so that everyone knows exactly who to go to and what to do. And of course, timely reporting requirements to the proper authorities. We see this a lot in the news. Misconduct may or may not have happened, but it didn't show its face until 20 or 30 years later. That makes it very, very difficult to get to the bottom of the situation, to really dig through the facts and figure out if sexual misconduct really did take place. We are, in this country, we are innocent until proven guilty. And I would like to know that if, God forbid, someone reported if I was harassing someone, I would like to know that there would be a timely investigation. I would want this to happen, because clearly I would not do that. And I don't think any of you would either. It's all fair that reporting be done within a timely manner and to the proper authorities. If you feel that harassment has happened to you and you go and you tell your girlfriend down the street, that is not going to help with the situation. That's not going to do anything for you. It needs to be reported timely and properly. Okay? Now let's talk about fraud. In general, fraud is any purposeful communication that deceives, manipulates, or conceals facts in order to harm others. Fraud is a crime that can result in fines and or imprisonment. Accounting fraud. This is a big one. Accounting fraud usually involves falsifying information about a corporation's financial reports, which would otherwise provide important information about the financial health of the company to investors and other stakeholder groups. Accountants today feel increased pressure to perform, to keep fees low, and must follow complicated regulations, and all of which can contribute to the pressure to commit fraud. Congress passed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in 2002 to address many of these issues that create conflicts of interest for accounting firms auditing public corporations. And basically, the law generally prohibits accounting firms from providing both auditing and consulting services to the same firm. So that was considered back in 2002 to be a conflict of interest. And we found back in 2002 that that absolutely was a conflict of interest, and therefore laws were created to prevent that. Marketing fraud. Marketing fraud is the process of dishonestly creating, distributing, promoting, and pricing products. Serious ethical issues can occur in this area. False or misleading marketing communications can destroy stakeholder trust in a corporation. False or deceptive advertising is a key issue in marketing communications. Courts place false or misleading advertisements into three categories: puffery, implied falsity, and literal falsity. Puffery can be defined as exaggerating advertising, blustering, and boasting upon which no reasonable buyer would rely, and is not actionable under the Lanham Act. Implied falsity means that an advertising message has a tendency to mislead, confuse, or deceive the public. Literally false claims can be divided into tests prove establishment claims, when an advertisement cites a study or test that establishes the claim, and bald assertions, non-establishment claims, when the advertisement makes a claim that cannot be substantiated, as when a commercial states a certain product is superior to any other on the market. You've all heard those commercials. Our product is the best on the market. Now, advertising can also make ambiguous statements or weak claims from which viewers must infer a message. And these are often called weasel words. Last point I'd like to make, labeling issues. Labeling issues also create an ethical gray area. Consumer fraud. Consumer fraud occurs when consumers attempt to deceive businesses for their own gain. There are many different ways of engaging in consumer fraud, and this could be anything from stealing from stores to price tag switching to lying to obtain discounts. And we have collusion, which involves an employee who helps a consumer commit fraud. Duplicity involves a consumer duping a store. For example, a customer who stages an accident and then sues the store for damages is engaging in duplicity. Someone who stages a slip and fall accident and then falls and then sues. Guile. Guile is associated with a person who knows right from wrong but uses tricks to obtain an unfair advantage. Financial misconduct. The failure to understand and manage ethical risks played a significant role in the financial crisis. The most recent global recession was caused in part by a failure on the part of the financial industry to take appropriate responsibility for its decision to utilize risky and complex financial instruments. Corporate cultures were built on rewards for taking risks rather than rewards for creating value for stakeholders. Subprime lending and executive compensation in poorly performing or failed firms are two areas of ethical concern that emerged out of the most recent recession. The Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act was passed in 2010 to increase accountability and transparency in the financial industry and to protect consumers from deceptive financial practices. The act established a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, sometimes CFPB, to protect consumers from unsafe financial products. Remember that top executives are ultimately responsible for decisions made by the employees of their companies. Regulatory systems in place failed to catch these systematic risks that were at play during the financial industry meltdown. Insider trading. An insider is any officer, director, or owner of 10% or more of a class of a company's securities. So, officers, directors, owners, anyone that owns 10% or more of the shares, stock, or securities. And there are two types of insider trading. You have legal and illegal. Very simple. Illegal insider trading is the buying or selling of stocks by insiders who possess information that is not yet public. Okay, let's go back to who is considered an insider. It's an officer, director, or owner of 10% or more of securities, the shares that are available. And if it is illegal, if a director decides to sell all of their stock because they knew that the company was about to go bankrupt, okay, that's illegal. Can't do that. On the other hand, you have legal insider trading, and this involves legally buying and selling stock at an insider's company, but not all at one time. Insiders are required to report their trades within 2 days of the transaction. So that director that wanted to sell all of his stock because he found out the company was going bankrupt can't do that. However, he or she can sell small portions of it, a little bit here, a little bit there, but it has to be reported so that there is transparency. So if I, for example, if I'm looking at a particular company and I'm watching their stock, and if I see their director selling, they sell a bit of shares, and 2 days later they sell a bit more, and then 2 days later they sell a bit more, well then I know something's about to happen, and it's probably not good. Because if they're selling their stock to get out of the organization, it means something negative is about to hit the market. So there's legal insider trading and illegal insider trading. Next, intellectual property rights and privacy. This involves the legal protection of intellectual property. Now this is a big one these days now. Music, books, movies. Now a decision by the Federal Copyright Office, the FCO, helped lay the groundwork for intellectual property in the digital world. Now, digital copyrights continue to be a controversial issue in the United States and across the world, and existing laws are often difficult to enforce. And this is a big one, downloading free movies, downloading free books. And many privacy issues come into play in the business world. Some issues that managers should consider involve monitoring employees' use of technology and consumer privacy. Now, this can be a challenge for businesses today to meet the needs of consumers while at the same time protecting their privacy. There are a few legal protections of an employee's right to privacy while at work, which allows employers a great deal of leeway in monitoring employees. Electronic monitoring allows a company to determine whether productivity is lower than it could be because employees are spending too much time on personal activities. Practices that respect employee privacy but do not abdicate the employer's responsibility help create a climate of trust that promotes opportunities for resolving employee-employer disputes without lawsuits. There are two dimensions to consumer privacy: A, consumer awareness of information collection, and B, growing lack of consumer control over how companies use the personal information they collect. Finally, the challenge of determining ethical issues in business. Most ethical issues will become visible through stakeholder concerns about an event, activity, or the results of a business decision. Determining ethical issues is a constant challenge. Over time, problems can become ethical issues as a result of changing societal values. And once stakeholders trigger ethical issue awareness and individuals openly discuss it and ask for guidance and the opinions of others, one enters the ethical decision-making process.